Ron, okay. Okay, welcome to the board policy meeting, January 21st, 2020. The meeting been properly posted, Lynn?
Yes, we have.
Yes, thank you. Opportunity for citizens to speak, nobody here. Bright lights, none scheduled. We have several action items this evening, and further on, a discussion item. First one is the minutes from our December meeting. Looking for for approval of the minutes from,
December 17th, yes. I move to approve the minutes as presented from December 17th's Policy Committee meeting.
thank you,
I'll second if I may.
thank you. Any changes or corrections on the minutes?
I have none.
Okay. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? 3-0, Lynn. Okay. We have policy 0167.3, public participation at board meetings. And we had some discussion at the last board meeting, the full board meeting on this. And members of the board shared with us some of their opinions on it. And also, I had received an email, which you should probably have a copy of that. I sent that out.
Very helpful.
Yeah, and I don't know. I have no further views on this, no new views on this. But anybody, Joe, do you have anything new?
You know, the only thing, just based off of the board discussion and the email that you had, when I look at what we've presented as options, option 2, let's see here. I think that that option 2 was the option then that would satisfy if we change citizen to person based off of the email.
Or individual.
Or individual, any individual, any person, having a legitimate interest in the actions of the board may participate during the public portion of a meeting. So that really opens it up to any citizens coming up and speaking to, whatever they want to the board.
Corey?
Yeah, and I noted that change when I reviewed this prior to the meeting as well. I think person or individual certainly is fine. I did get the chairman's email that he forwarded. I thought that citizens' points were well made. We certainly don't want to exclude people based on their residency or citizenship. So I think the word citizen was meant to be person, but I think the implication can
It's interesting you mention it because at the committee meeting, I think you didn't make the last one, right?
Correct. I was
and I asked that question too. I says, is it really a capital citizen? And we decided, no, that's not what we meant. So it's still confusing for people, so I agree that maybe we want to not use the word citizen and use an individual or something like that.
Right. As far as option 2, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I support option 2. I know there's some concern, or there has been concern, that we're going to be overwhelmed by people from outside the district, outside the state, talking about issues. That would be a problem I would love to have. I would love to have so many people here that we have to, shorten their time, or I think it's a problem we're not going to encounter. Plus, I know there's provisions in this policy that allows the board or presiding officer of that meeting to limit the total amount. So I think there's protections in place.
If I could, I'd advocate, there's a couple of things in there that, generally each speaker would be limited to 2 to 3 minutes. Our past practice has been 3 minutes unless there's a lot of time. I do think for a matter of decorum of meetings, I mean, as I've talked to superintendents in other districts where the public comment is not, if there aren't good guidelines around the public comment, it turns into a situation where public comment does not get limited to one person speaks for a limited amount of time, and you can lose the decorum of the meeting within the scope of it if you have nothing to fall back on in a policy. And I recently talked to some superintendents where that did happen in their districts, and it even put board members in positions where there was a comment perhaps made to Mrs. Voigt, specific to Mrs. Voigt, and you started to respond, and you don't have the ability to respond during that time. So, within some guidelines, I do agree with you that we should let everybody speak, but there are some topics perhaps that warrant a public forum where everybody could come and speak at that particular time. So I would advocate that, but This is the policy of the board and how the board chooses to operate. So I just give that perspective because I've talked to some school districts where it has turned into an uncontrolled public comment that can be challenging then for board members to manage and even keep the meeting within the scope of what that meeting was agendized for.
Good. I like your comments. I think they fit.
I have one additional
Please.
kind of consideration. The policy that the woman who had shared the email with you referenced was from Madison, and they make more specific accommodation statements than what we do in L about the fact that if someone does need to have a translator, that they would be able to be allowed 6 minutes instead of 3 minutes, allowing time for, like, say, someone that's converting because of a disability or a situation where there would be a translation necessary. And I think, like, just to mention that we're not going to limit them to 3 minutes if they have special circumstances, I thought was justifiably noted in the Madison's policy. To quote their item 2 on theirs was that during the regular board agenda, an individual who registers shall be given up to 3 minutes to speak to the board. Speakers who require language interpretation support in order to speak to the board shall be given up to 6 minutes to speak, which shall generally provide the sufficient time for the interpreter to convey the speaker's message to the board. So I know we do the ADA accommodations, but that would be for someone that's speaking with
Yeah, I'm trying to remember
a
if
translation from another language.
I don't remember if we've ever had the instance. We've had it in some situations. I think we've had it in like town hall meetings and stuff like that. I can't remember one here.
We did when there was discussion about the Blair closing.
That was at a town hall. That was in the town hall format.
Okay.
Yeah, it was. I think it was, yeah.
Oh, actually, it was at the board.
No, it was. It
Yeah.
was a regular school board meeting. We made the decision for the consolidation vote that
But
night.
did we have a translator here?
Yeah,
We did
did.
have somebody translate for somebody else here.
We did?
Yep.
Okay.
And they had the overflow, having a translation going on as the discussion was going on.
I've had it in the court system where I have to talk extra slow and then you have to pause. So yeah, I could see it definitely taking twice as long. I think accommodating that would be appropriate.
Well, if there's no urgency by the committee, we can take those suggestions and put it into a draft to come back in February for further discussion.
That'd be all right with me.
Good point.
I don't have a problem with that. I guess I've never really realized it in terms of doubling the time, but I guess it would be. Yeah.
It totally did,
If you could email me that language, that would be wonderful, or just give us the hard copy. And we
I can just
Yep.
share this with you.
Yep.
And
And then that same passage, I'll keep reading the whole thing because we might just lift the whole thing, goes on individuals with disabilities, and that's why I mentioned the ADA reference as well, who require accommodations in order to register and speak to the board shall be granted such accommodation upon request. Other extensions may be granted only by approval of the board or committee. So basically it's 3 minutes unless you've got a physical reason to need more time or a translation situation.
And so just, I guess, one clarification. Absolutely, we'll put that in there. But I think the clarification that needs to be discussed with the whole board is is it our expectation that you register to speak and list what you're going to speak on, whether it's related to the agenda or not? Do we have that registration requirement? Because we often get to the end of it and then we open it up to anybody else who has possible comment. And so if we're not going to make people register, do we eliminate the sign up altogether?
No,
Or do we then require that everybody sign up who wants to speak? Because
That's right.
there should be some clarification around that expectation as well.
that's where I would be. They should sign up.
And maybe we tweak that aspect of it as well. Because again, in the Madison one, they talk about 15 minutes prior to the meeting.
Yep.
In that 15-minute time period, you need to sign up to speak. Someone by proxy could sign up for you if you can't get there in that time period, but you must be present when your name is called to do the presentation.
And that's-
and I think listing your address, listing the topic that you want. The other thing they had was if you would wish to registration forms will allow citizens not wishing to speak an opportunity to express an opinion. So they, and I know that when we've had some of the public forums in the past, like with the budget cut discussions, we went to that. That, you'd have one person speaking for a group and then have like 5 or 6 turning in the supplementary. We agree with a statement made by, so it's really like having 5 people speak,
Saying the same thing.
on the same topic, but not hearing the same thing 5 times. And I like that idea too, when you have a hot topic.
We've already done that.
I'm just curious. I'm sorry.
All right.
What's the point of listing the subject that the person's going to speak about? Because I think only the presiding officer sees that, and the other board members don't. So I
It's
don't know.
included in the minutes, though.
Oh, it is. Okay.
Yeah.
So it just helps minutes. But- okay.
It
There's not
helps.
a screening.
She doesn't
there.
have to worry about whatever they say is their topic is what she can include in the minutes, rather than having to try to do a summary of what might not be as clearly defined as.
Okay.
knowing
There's
what-
no other benefit to listing or.
Well, I think for a matter of practice, if there is something that continues to come to the board as a concern, does the board then want to perhaps agendize a topic based off of the number of citizens that have spoken to it? And we have that record. That is a written record then of their participation at the meeting.
Right.
And you can go back. If somebody says, we keep coming back to you, well, our district serves 90,000 residents and one person speaks on one topic, is that worth board agenda?
Right.
Or if we get, 25 citizens, 30 citizens over, 2-3 month period, does that then warrant us putting it on a committee agenda or the full board? I think having that written record is important.
Understood. Okay.
Case in point, we were hearing about the middle school schedule and curriculum, like for 3 or 4 meetings in a row, and we determined from that continued conversation that we needed to take some action on it, which we have subsequently been working on. It's not resolved yet, but
And the one
to
thing.
show we did hear them.
Perhaps the one thing, though, to continue is if we, letter J, the portion of the meeting, we want to give people 30 minutes, but if we're at 32 minutes, do we want to cut off discussion? The board president could use judgment at that 32-minute mark, based off of what he or she sees in the written, presentation. I got 10, 11, 12 people who are registered to speak. It's going to take 33 or 36 minutes. We'll just go for it tonight. But if you get 30 or 40 people who show up to speak on a topic, and we're saying you get 2 to 3 minutes, now we're at an hour and a half, 2
Yeah.
hours of presentation. The board president can say to the entire board, I would like us to vote to extend the public participation, knowing that we have all this other business that we need to get to, or then do we table this to a public forum, and then we have a public forum on a specific topic where any number of citizens can come and address you. That future planning helps that, and even if it's just that 15 minutes beforehand where they sign up.
I like in J that we actually put in writing or unilaterally by the board president or committee chair, because that's been past practice, and it's actually just making that be. We don't have to stop everything, have a board vote to go the 2 minutes over. It can be just something that's decided by the president or chair, committee chair.
That's the genesis of this conversation. It was, does the policy match our practice? And when you looked at what we had in policy, it wasn't matching how we were interacting with our citizens, so we wanted to make sure.
In reality, I don't think we've probably had more than a half a dozen situations, not counting the teachers, of non-residents addressing us. It's been rare, and we didn't want to exclude the teachers anyway, so just opening it up, I think, is fine. So what we're really saying then is option 2, adjusted for the terminology on citizen, would probably individual, good idea, okay. Stays, that's currently our next step. J, we've taken care of, and you're going to get the words for the
Those from Mrs.
bottom
White.
L.
Yep.
And I don't think there was anything else that was of issue in there, was there?
Do we want to identify the registration form kind of process to that?
Well, that,
Does say,
The name and address of the participant, the group affiliation, if and when appropriate, and the topic to be addressed is there. Do we want to get more specific about the option of having an express an opinion without having to take the time to speak?
why
Yeah.
not, that,
yeah, this is true public participation. Submitting a written document is not that public participation at a board meeting. I mean, that's more or less if somebody were, back in the day, somebody were to write a letter to the board and email that in with a news article on something or a research article on something.
No, that's not how I interpret this. I interpret this as being that same form. And you get here and you realize, oh, I'm not the only one. There's already 12 people here that's planning to speak on this topic.
Okay.
I'm going to waive my 2 minutes, my 3-minute topic, and I'm just going to say, I'm here for this concern.
Okay.
Because you think of how many times we've had a room full of people that are upset about
Dan,
something.
we've done that.
Yeah. But
Why do we have to document it?
that they can just check that they want to go on record and
Yes.
as expressing their opinion?
It's not even new to us.
Okay. But again, we're trying to put in our policy that is a possibility.
Well, apparently it is because people have been doing it.
Yeah,
I don't care,
so-
I guess, if you want to put it in there.
If you could, I mean, because this is something that we're going to continue to discuss as a committee, if you would give me what you saw from Madison and then perhaps a draft of what you think the language would be.
Where it would fit here?
Yeah. We can build that in and then discuss it next month
Let's do
as
that.
a policy committee.
Okay.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Curry.
so I guess you could, I don't know what section you're referencing, I just missed it, but you could say something in lieu of stating, speaking at the meeting, citizens or individuals could submit a written statement in lieu of speaking or something like that, but is that what you're talking about?
I don't see this as being a statement. I see it as just saying the topic, right? I'm here to talk about whatever, topic that might be the situation.
Okay.
The ones I think of are all like budget cuts and staffing issues and things like that, that a lot of times you'll have a room full of teachers
Okay.
that would like to say something about that, but maybe 3 or 4 get up and speak on their behalf. But you just identify the fact that we did have a full house that could have all, taken the time to get up and speak, but we can sort of head off. We only give 30 minutes. But there are a lot of people that have a concern about that. Like you're saying, we have a lot of residents that we're representing.
Yeah, the gun resolution was a good topic for that because we did have one person speak and 5 or 6 people submit a statement in support of that person's position. So if you wanted to give us some language, we'll bring it back next month at committee and then, kind of see how it fits into this public participation section.
Let's do it that way. Okay?
Because otherwise, there's a communications kind of
You
thing.
you should be asking for permission to talk. I mean, you were really running wild on me there.
I'm sorry. We do have the communication part of the full board agenda, that any communication that would come to the superintendent could be, brought up at that point. But do we have a committee like this have that opportunity? If you've received, I think back to the gun issue. There were a lot of things that were coming in as people just
Yes.
sending documentation types of like statements they wanted to have be shared. But if they don't want to get up and speak, do we have a chance at this kind of a forum, or at the safety committee or whatever other committee it might be, for them to speak to it?
Opportunity for citizens to speak
But if they don't want to speak, they just want to give you
or correspondence,
or correspondence.
right there.
Okay, so then it's there if they want to have something else submitted.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
I would just add that there's nothing in the public participation policy would prohibit a citizen from making a direct phone call to or sending an email to a board member. And that then, whatever is brought to you, could be brought up as part of discussion at a committee meeting. I mean, similar to what we did with the person who emailed on, what Madison does, for instance. And so you, as board members, could always bring that to the committee as insight.
For discussion.
Well,
And that's, but it doesn't necessarily go on the board record. It's just, what people are reaching out to you as board members doing. If you, as the board, represent the citizens of the community, those individuals can certainly reach out to you what their concerns are. So,
and they do.
yep.
Okay. We will revisit that one in February.
Can I ask for a clarification, please?
Please.
We're taking option 2, and we're changing it to say any individual have, any individual? Okay. Then I just want to make one other clarification. Then earlier in the policy on page 1, we talk about citizen request for board resolution. That's one of the bolded items on page 1. we want to call that individual request or public request?
Public.
I'm thinking if we're removing the word citizen,
Yep,
maybe we should look at it everywhere?
I like your thought.
Okay, okay.
Public would be okay.
Okay, and then also on page 2, the new language we added in regarding unless required by the ADA. It's letter L. It says no citizen, so we'll say no individual? Okay, all right, just wanted to be clear. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Okay,
I don't want to make anything up.
good catch. Policy 20, go, okay? 2431, interscholastic athletics and district activities. And this is really one where we have been told what to do, if I'm reading this correctly.
Correct.
Well, there's actually a change on, I don't know if the pages aren't, not one, third page, just introducing that policy 5460 is titled graduation requirements, and that is correct.
Yep.
And then we have the change on the 5th page, which was given to us by Wisconsin Interscholastic Athletic Association, right in the middle of the page. I do have a question on terminology here. If you read that, okay, I'll read the whole thing. Any student charged and convicted of a felony shall, upon the filing of felony charges, become ineligible for all further participation until the student has paid his or her debt to society and courts consider the sentence served. Is that, can it just say consider the sentence served, or does it have to say consider that the sentence has been served? I don't know if that's just nitpicking or not.
From a language perspective, I mean, it's grammatically correct.
It is, okay.
As it is written.
Then that's fine with me.
I mean, we can certainly change that language if it's more friendly.
Ask an attorney.
If I may, yeah, I get grammatically correct, but it suggests two different things, that there's two burdens for the person, the student to meet. Pay the debt to society and the courts consider the sentence served. When someone's convicted of a felony or misdemeanor, they get what's called a judgment of conviction. It will specifically list what the terms are: probation, condition time, restitution, whatever it is. So I would think,
So it doesn't necessarily mean has been served, it just means they've been served that sentence?
well, I think I would just strike debt to society, because I don't know what that means legally. I guess to directly
that's
answer your
good.
question.
Thank you, because I don't know what it means either. That's why I asked the question.
Yeah.
I tried to write something into it.
I mean, I get what they're trying to say, but I think it's just superfluous language. I don't think it adds anything except possibly confusion.
So if we ended it with a debt to society, that would include the fact that this court said do this.
Yeah, because I mean, the judgment of conviction for any person convicted is going to be very specific on what they have to do.
So are you saying that further participation until the student has, or until the courts consider the sentence served? Is that, so eliminating the language from including, so from until, so it would be the student has paid his or her debt to society and so that it would say further participation until the courts consider the sentence served.
Yes, I
Okay.
would suggest that. Could I address
Now
it?
I'm
Yep.
confused. We're going to get rid of the paid the debt to society? Oh, and consider the sentence.
Yep. When the courts consider it served, the student has paid the
Has
debt
paid
to
his debt to-
society.
Okay,
Right.
so that becomes the clarification. Excuse me, thank you. Go.
If I may ask a question, is this language, I guess what I have a concern about, any student charged,
Yep.
is that a requirement, that specific language from,
The WIAA, given some of the recent things that have come up. So student charged with sexual assault gets to finish the football season. By the time it gets through the courts, it goes until the end, and then the kid is found guilty, but yet they've participated along the way. What the WIAA is saying is your conduct must be such that you're not charged with crimes in order to be eligible for sports.
is that a suggestion to districts or is that a requirement?
That is a requirement to stay compliant with their rules around interscholastic athletics.
Okay, because I know they have rules that are higher than the criminal code.
Correct.
You know, so that's, okay.
Correct.
That's
I know
fine.
there's been a lot of public scrutiny in and around what kids have been able to continue to participate in athletics, after they've been charged. And since athletics are a privilege, they're not a right, the WIA has set up a higher threshold.
Okay.
Good way to put it. So, we now,
Just
Section
for the
C.
committee's understanding, the WIA does use debt to society in their language. However, it is up to the committee what you want to approve in policy. I am not the attorney, though, so I defer to you, Corey, on.
Read what they say, and they have an explanation for it, if that would be helpful. The wording of the rule seems to presume that even being charged with a felony implies a debt to society. In theory, a student could be falsely charged with a felony and be immediately ineligible. They may miss huge chunks of or an entire season while fighting those charges. If they are ultimately found to be innocent in a court of law, they still had to sit out that entire amount of time. So again, the kid is ineligible as soon as any felony charge is brought, regardless of its ultimate validity in a court of law, and irrespective of whether a kid will be found guilty of such charge.
It seems to, I appreciate you reading that. It seems to speak to my comment about charging being among the trigger, not only convicted, but I don't think it directly speaks to the debt to society language unless I missed
Okay.
it. But
Okay.
that makes.
I don't have any problem stopping with debt to society if you think that is
I think so.
clearer.
I suggest it is, but
If there's, right, what the WIAA will put their rules out. If this policy, minus that section, the student has paid, if that's eliminated, then, we're okay, I believe, to pass the policy as it is.
I would think that doesn't change the intent
No, not at all.
at all. It's just clarifying what is the debt to society. And I think the judgment of conviction and meeting that judgment of, the final determination of a judgment of conviction or innocence would be the key thing. So I think it's a good clarification, actually.
So this is one of those statutory ones that we would be bringing back to the committee for final approval. It is the law change type policy, so
So we would be approving this in
February.
In
at
committee. But in committee.
Committee. at-
Not
in
to the
February,
board.
Correct.
Good,
And that
let's do
would-
it.
yep.
Do we make a motion to make that change then, or no, not necessary, as an action item?
An action item tonight.
Oh, you want to make a motion to make the change?
Yeah.
Okay. Corey?
I think you should, since it's your suggestion.
sure, I will move to amend the suggested revision of policy number 2431 to strike on the last page of our handout section under violations requiring additional penalties, paragraph 2. I would strike the language as follows, quote, "The student has paid his/her debt to society," and close quotes.
That's the end of the sentence. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
So you're striking, and the courts consider the sentence.
No, I'm sorry. I would just strike the section, the wording that says, quote, "The student has paid his/her debt to society and."
Oh, that was turned around. I thought you were doing it the other way. Are we all clear on this?
I second the motion.
So the student, okay, read that again to me, Corey.
Sure. I would suggest striking the words, "The student has paid his/her debt to society and."
Until the court, so we'll read, until the courts consider the sentence served.
Yes, sir.
Okay, one or the other, I guess, makes sense. I guess neither way bothers me. Courts consider it closed, that's good. Any other changes or,
No, sir.
okay? All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? 3-0 then.
Thank you.
Okay. That will come back next month for us to approve it. Is that what we're saying, Joe? 8462, child abuse and neglect. And this has been brought up from a previous board reading, and a paragraph has been added to the very end of this policy. Any comments or observations? George?
We did work with council on the language that you see at the end of the proposed update. Here, it's underlined in green. We wanted to make sure that, if staff are to be disciplined, that they were first, in fact, a mandatory reporter who did not report. And we also wanted to make sure that we protected the due process rights of that individual, through investigation in our employee handbook.
Okay. And this one, we would be approving here and then taking it to the board, right?
Correct.
So is there a motion for accepting the change of 8462 to include that last paragraph?
So moved.
Moved by
Seconded.
Corey, seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
3-0. Oh, all in favor. Nobody against, right? Yeah, got it. Okay. And policy 8510 is a wellness policy. And Joe, I wrote to myself a note here. What's the history on this one all of a sudden showing up? I must have missed it.
We
or
had some new rules out of the Department of Public Instruction on
that's what-
wellness.
Okay.
So we worked with the individuals involved, Human Resources, Business Office, I think PE staff was involved in the discussion, to incorporate the changes. So what you see, because it is a more or less legal change recommended by the DPI, this would be a policy committee level approval. You can see underlined in green what's been added, struck in red is what has been taken out. We periodically get policy recommendations like this, and in order to remain compliant, we must make those changes.
Okay, so this is DPI's work.
Correct.
Okay. And
It looks familiar, if I may,
yes, go ahead, Don.
because we talked about it in 2017, because this is one of the first ones I very much remember this discussion.
Way back when, okay.
But not that far back. but-
Well, and there's a few, yeah, actually, there's some back here. District just encourages foods offered on the school campus to meet and exceed, yeah. If they don't get changed in Washington now.
Yeah, and just as a reminder, anytime you see something around wellness, food service and such, it generally comes from the USDA as the starting point. And it generally gets tied to our reimbursement for providing free and reduced lunch to students of need. So that's generally the tie, the hook to get you to make the policy updates.
I didn't see anything wrong with it, Diane.
But this one, you're saying came from DPI.
This came from DPI, but
Same thing.
stuff kind of funnels downhill. I mean, the rules come from the feds and go to the DPI, and then they make their updates for Wisconsin.
Go ahead.
It seems that some of the changes are letting school board members be less involved in the decision-making, the annual review per se, noting that under public involvement, and then at the very end, when they talk about the annual review, they're striking the part that said a school board member was supposed to be part of that kind of process.
Yep.
Yeah, we had several of those, Diane, you're right. I didn't catch that.
So I think it's a good thing.
Yeah.
And if you remember the rules around meetings and stuff like that, if you get, if a committee serves as an arm of the board, then you're in a position where you're noticing the meeting as a public meeting, and whereas, some of these wellness things are truly, managerial type things that the school has to deal with, operational, that don't really impact the board beyond the policy that the board sets.
And this is one we could approve at the board, at the committee?
Correct.
Can we approve it tonight, or we have to wait to a reading?
Our policy says that we would have it at 2 meetings for
The
approval.
next,
Next
February for this
February
one.
it would be done then.
That's what yeah. The other one was C. That was the same way we're going to bring it in February.
Correct.
This one goes to the board. Yes, Dan?
Since it's an action item, do we need to make a motion to say that we accept the changes that they're recommending and we'll further review them next month, or no?
Yeah, I mean, the do that is listed as an action. You have to take action on it
Okay.
tonight. I mean, either to table to next month or to, approve the first reading of the policy, because this
Yeah,
is the
to
first
approve
reading.
the first
at the
reading
board.
would be appropriate.
I so move.
I'll second, please.
All right, any discussion? All in favor of approving the first reading, say aye.
Aye.
3-0, Lynn. Wow.
Fast?
Okay, that's the action items. There we go. We have a discussion item, policy 5600.01, disciplinary consequences for student misconduct. This is just an item that has surfaced. Joe talked to me about it a couple of weeks back or so. It's kind of an interesting, maybe just tell them. I think it's
Yeah,
good.
so policy 5600.01 gives the administration the direction on how they should treat student misconduct in our schools. And if you look at level 3, this policy has been in place in Waukesha for, I believe, since 1994 when it was first written. It goes way back in our system. It was reapproved when we did Neola, but we just cut and pasted everything from the old policy into the new policy as we go forward. And what I'd like to direct you to is the page where you see level 3 offense that talks about proceeding directly to pre-expulsion review. It would be on the second
Way in the bottom of the page.
page of the policy. Under this, the administration is not saying that what is in that section should entirely be moved to another section, nor is administration asking for leniency as it pertains to student misconduct. But there's a section in here that harkens us all back to when we were in school. And if you look at item F, the use, possession, sale, distribution, or being under the influence of alcohol or any illegal controlled substance, including unauthorized use of over-the-counter mood-altering drugs. We deal with, on a regular basis, on an annual basis, about 110 to 120 pre-expulsion reviews. 50% of those pre-expulsions, or near 50%, are for being under the influence of alcohol or marijuana, which a pre-expulsion is triggered by a 5-day out-of-school suspension, and it requires a district administrator to go in and address the behavior. Now, I'm talking about just being under the influence, triggering a pre-expulsion. In talking to my colleagues in the district and in talking to others, including some board members, just on, like, what was it like when you were in high school? Kids would go out and have a drink, and they would get maybe an underage drinking ticket or suspended for 1, 2, 3 days of school. What our current policy is directing us to do is to take those kids to a pre-expulsion review for having alcohol or smoking marijuana on their time, when they leave school or whatever it is. I'm not talking about using drugs at school. I'm not talking about selling. I'm just talking about simply being under the influence while on school grounds. And what my proposed change, and administration has asked that I bring this forward, is that we move being under the influence and only under the influence, none of the other ones, but just under the influence, up to what is considered to be a level 1 offense. I don't want you to think that that's any less severe, because if you were to look at level 2, level 1 flows into level 2, goes to level 3. Level 2 says serious violations or repeated violations of the above will result in a suspension or pre-expulsion review. As a general rule, the following progressive discipline will be used. So first offense, 1 to 3 day suspension. That goes back to how policy used to be implemented around a kid coming to school while under the influence. They leave for lunch, they have a couple beers, they come back, they are found to have been drinking, you're suspended for a few days, you're referred to the police, you get an underage drinking ticket. Instead of going to a pre-expulsion, which requires that you miss a week of school, it's a 5-day suspension, and then you go through this central office hearing, which in most instances is unnecessary to address what this behavior actually is. Now, if we talk about possession of drugs on school grounds, if we talk about using them while you're at school, if we talk about selling them, distributing them, giving them away, those are all level 3s. Those are pre-expulsions, and in some cases, they go directly to the board. But just being under the influence, if a student, if you think about this in the broader picture, if you're walking down the street and you've got marijuana in your pocket, your possession of marijuana, you're generally going to get in trouble, more trouble with the police, right? I don't know, Corey, you deal with this, right? I mean,
Sure.
you get a citation for that, plus, depending on how much, you can get, intent to deliver, intent to sell, all that other stuff. If you're caught smoking marijuana out on the street, you get a pretty stiff penalty. But if a kid is walking around and has a couple drinks, beer, whatever it is, generally get an underage drinking ticket and turned over to their parents. And so what this policy is doing is putting a tremendous amount of burden on just being under the influence. Not selling, I'm not talking about selling, I'm not talking about distributing, giving it away, I'm not talking about having a big weed in your pocket and getting caught with it. I mean, none of that stuff, all that stuff is still level 3. It's simply being under the influence that we want to be able to address. And knowing that level 2 of this policy gives the administration discretion as to how do they want to do it. How do they want to implement that? Is it a 1 to 3 day suspension for coming to school, coming back to school after lunch, after smoking a joint or having a beer? Is it a 3 day suspension? Is it a 5 day suspension? Did you have so much to drink that you came to school and you were an absolute mess? I mean, that gives administration discretion on each one. What our current policy says is if you're under the influence, you go to pre-expel. And what we're finding is that is really having a substantial impact on the student who decided to drink. It goes well beyond just the regular old ticket that you'd have gotten on the street. And it's something that we're asking get moved up to level 1, where you have administrative discretion instead of automatically going to level 3 and going.
And level 1, I just want to make sure we're clear on this. You would list it up here in level 1, but level 1 itself doesn't have any discipline out of it other than to go to 2 or 3.
Correct. Level one is more or less states what the misconduct could be. If you see it, theft, robbery, extortion, vandalism, willful disobedience, non-compliance, insubordination, and the list goes on to about 20 some items. Level 2 talks about the discipline then that you would get, which talks about administrative discretion. Level 3 lists violations that automatically trigger a pre-expulsion review.
Comments, observations?
You go.
This is one of these issues as an elected official. It's very easy to say zero tolerance, because I think some people could look at this change as, I think, incorrectly, saying we support people students going out and drinking or supporting going out and smoking. It doesn't do this. I think in the criminal justice system for adults, I think the way you categorize this is absolutely correct. I think the way you categorize the punishment for that behavior as treated by police officers and deputies is absolutely correct. We are not in the business of having our students be saints. Kids are going to make mistakes. I think this gives, as you mentioned, discretion to the administration to look at it. Is this simply I call it bracketing. The most least offensive way to violate this policy is someone literally has a sip from their dad's beer or mom's beer and goes to school and someone smells it and that's a level 1. Under the current policy, that's a level 3, pre-expulsion, right? Likewise, what's the worst case scenario? Someone gets so inebriated or so under the influence that they can't stand, they're non-functioning and they're in cardiac arrest but I think, as you suggest, this gives the discretion to deal with that.
So when I was an assistant principal, I had multiple situations where the kid would have the beer. They would come to school, somebody would smell it, we'd get this SRO involved, I would do the suspension for a few days. The SRO would generally issue the underage drinking citation. Not necessarily end of issue, but kind of end of issue with that kid. Most kids learn from that because parents would come in and you lose all the privileges that were associated. And then there was another situation that I had. It was on the last day of school. It was during exams. I got called to a classroom, and this teacher suspected that a kid was under the influence. So I went down there. I removed the student. As we were walking down to the office, the kid displayed all of the classic, like, Hollywood drunk type things. It was almost like he was a pinball from one wall to the other as he was walking down the hallway. He got into my office. He leaned back in the chair. I asked him if he was all right. He kind of erupted like a volcano, vomited all over my office, all over himself. And so that was a situation then where we did, do a pre-expel type process for him, and he had restitution to clean the office, and he got his underage drinking citation. So again, administrative judgment would say you can treat the situations differently based off of the actual behavior of the individual in front of you.
Thank you, Corey. Diane?
It seems to me that it would give administrators a lot more discretion in terms of how to handle it. And I think the severity of 1 to 3 day suspension, and I think the realization that you're talking an underage ticket. So you're talking about not just the school involvement, but you're going to be, paying your debt to society in the form of that ticket as well. And I don't think it is up to the level of the other things that are going to require the pre-expulsion kind of expectations of
And
handling.
there are plenty of outside school consequences. I mean, it's a citation, but it can also be loss of a driver's license for a minor. If you're an athlete or in activities, you'll lose your eligibility for a percentage of the season. So there's a lot of other things that happen beyond that 1 to 3 days of suspension, which, in today's day and age, if mom and dad are going to work, oftentimes suspension turns into a bit of a holiday for the kid. We could probably make it a little bit more inhospitable for the student to actually be in school with us than we can giving them 5 days of leisure.
Right. And if it really was a one-time goof up, to punish them that severely academically.
Right. That happens at certain times of the year. You're like into exam prep. A senior in high school, perhaps, who's got some AP tests coming up, they decide to do something stupid because they don't have the cloud of athletics over them anymore, and, it's winding down the year. They miss 5 days worth of AP preparation going into the exam. That could be detrimental to that 3, 4, 5 that they want to score on the test. So we just would like to use the discretion to treat each case instead of having that mandatory, you had a beer, you're going to pre-expulsion, which requires a substantial suspension from school.
I don't think that a person seeing this in the greater community is going to think that we're being soft on them, because I really don't think that there's still plenty of consequence for that. It's just, I don't think it's up to the level.
If you read it accurately.
If you want,
it is. That's why I made a point about it. I agree with you 100%. But
where would you put it on the list of A through S?
Item T.
T.
Those aren't listed in any order of priority up there. Harassing, threatening, or intimidating others, or sexual harassment is listed as a level 1. It can trigger a 5-day suspension if it's bad enough, but it's letter K.
Compared to loitering.
Illegal gambling, if you're betting, $10, $20 on something and, you get caught, that could be a 1-day suspension. But if you're running the ring, we might want to bring you to the board for expulsion. So you have some flexibility within those. We're just asking that for actually being under the influence.
I think this makes just so much sense. Now, this is a discussion item only.
Yep.
So we can bring this forward written up next month?
Correct. And at the February meeting, we can have that prepared for you at the February meeting for what would be then the first reading at committee. And then it would get forwarded to the March board as possible approval item.
Yeah, that sounds very, very appropriate. Everybody agree? Okay. We'll see it in February. Okay, other business?
I wanted to just follow up on the minutes related to fragrance issue that was listed under other.
Thank you.
Did you have a chance to look into that? Is there anything in our?
I have looked in every policy to talk about fragrances and such, and I cannot find anything as it pertains to the question at hand.
Yeah.
So
I guess the question would be, because this came to me also, Diane, then and maybe this does involve at point Tim Williamson, I always say that wrong.
Yeah.
Because it came up as a question from a custodian, or maybe more than one custodian, is an issue about dealing with some of the air fresheners and some of the things that they have to deal with in classrooms, and whether they in fact can have a negative effect on people's health, breathing.
And so as that was brought to me, it was on cleaning supplies. So it wasn't necessarily on air fresheners as it was
You're right.
cleaning supplies. So, so I guess, I will look again to see if there's anything that talks about, air fresheners that may trigger
We'll find
whatever. I wasn't able to find anything on my first peruse. I will do that again. But if any employee has a general concern with the conditions of the building, the process to address that is to first talk to their principal or their direct supervisor. And so if the individual or individuals who have come to you haven't reached out to those individuals first, then essentially kind of getting down to what we talked about last night,
Okay.
then there's no opportunity for administrative remediation to the situation. And then the board is getting involved with it because, so I would say that if there is, if the concern has come forward, encourage that individual to go to either their supervisor, if they have a supervisor like Tim, or to their building principal to begin the discussion around it. Everybody is capable of accessing our policies. So the idea of do we have policy on this or that, it's public. Everybody can take a look at what is legitimately our policies, and they can do some homework, in that regard. I will go back and look to see if we have anything that talks about air fresheners in classrooms.
I didn't find any. I looked too.
But, as we briefly talked about this, everything has an odor. People will use essential oils as a calming thing. Diffusers in their classrooms or in the school area. People will have, in my office, we get Lysol that has kind of a lemon fresh scent to it. I don't know if that's bothering anybody's headaches or not. When we look at the heat or the coolness of our lighting in the schools, that can trigger headaches. When I had that happen in my office, I reached out to the service building. They fixed the light bulbs for us. So if people at the school level or the service level have not had that opportunity, that's where these individuals need to be directed to.
Someplace in the way back of my mind, which is a terrible place to look, I think, and maybe it was an OSHA thing, that I've encountered this someplace else in my life, that somebody was dealing with this, and I'm trying to remember if it was maybe out of OSHA. Somebody like Tim would know about that.
Correct.
And I think I'm going to go backwards with going back,
and Tim is
so and
certainly,
so, and have you discussed this with your supervisor?
as you can see in the back of the room here, we have the sensor, the test kit for the radon. Tim is
that what
very
that is?
astute. That thing hanging down in the back. The CIA isn't looking into our meeting. It's actually the radon tester. So he's on top of everything that we do as
Thing
far
up
as air
there?
quality and health and safety in the district. So he's running those tests. If somebody were to reach out with him and say, hey, somebody's burning this in their classroom or using this type of diffuser in their classroom, can we do that? We can have a conversation about it.
Diane?
You don't necessarily have to have policy for everything. In this situation, how do you start to say that, somebody might be allergic to the perfume that the kid sitting next to him is wearing?
Right.
So how do you deal with all of those potential fragrances that could be upsetting the air quality circumstances?
I've talked to
I don't
any
know how
middle-
you do it.
Talk to any middle school teacher in the fall or the spring. They have a legitimate argument against the kids' body odor because they're not wearing deodorant to school. But it's get up to the fourth floor in Les Paul and you can sense the problem. But again, if we're able to have the conversation, if this person can go talk to their administrator, whoever it is, the building principal or Tim, that's a good starting point for this.
I'll take that. Go ahead, Dan.
The next thing would be the agenda changes that we've been talking about. Where does that stand now? Can we change the information and discussion and bring them together?
Yeah, so you'll see in the months ahead that the templates that are coming to you, the administrative, these documents here, they're going to look differently. It's going to be action and then information discussion. And then that's what you'll see going forward. That's not a board level change or a committee level change. We brought that to you just as a point of information last month.
Right. Related to that, though, do we want to make a point of changing the opportunity for individuals to speak? as we're looking at agenda changes, just to make that switch in general business B.
Do that.
Yeah, 'cause that's another one that's like,
That will require, I will have to look at the policy on board agendas. That may actually require a policy change. So we will look at that.
okay. Because this is another, it just popped when she was talking about all the citizens. It's like, oh, there's one right there too.
Board agenda is actually a
It
policy.
is on policy, yeah.
Okay,
It has its own policy.
But we can
tweak that.
fix it
Correct.
the correct way, yeah. It does, it's interesting, that troubled me initially, and then it troubled that lady that contacted us, so. And when you think about it, that's a big word these days. Wow.
But it just, I mean, it depending on who you are, it's a different word for a variety of reasons. And,
Yes.
you know, by taking it from citizen to individual, you know, the board could be opening themselves up for a lot of public comment on that. Or if you were changing it from individual to citizen, the board could be opening itself up, you know, given the fact that that is, a lot of people have deeply held beliefs around that. How are we categorizing and using the term citizen versus individual persons and that nature? So,
But we do have children and parents in our district who are not citizens.
correct.
I mean, capital C again.
Yep.
Or do we change it to public? Opportunity for public to speak.
And that's a opportunity.
Either way, we have to change it to the,
It'd be less offensive.
And I'm not, I mean, you know, strictly trying to stay away from semantics. Any change to citizen could, in fact, you know, generate a public debate on that. So,
getting out of it maybe is.
I mean, we
Even
don't want
somebody's
to
going to say something about that too.
you know, and the unique thing about policy is, you know, each board adopts and sets its own policies, and those policies are unique to the values of the community and the legal requirements that the district must have. So, you know, that's why that's why I appreciate Neola, because it's very general and it gives us the ability to wordsmith it to fit our needs. That's why I do rarely go to other school districts to, you know, kind of grab their policy, because that was developed to meet the values of that particular community.
It's interesting, speaking about the air fresheners and stuff like that, Lynn did pull up a policy that, about students and chronic health conditions, and listing the health conditions. The only thing in there that even comes close is the word allergies. And I guess we'd have to define whether or not there are allergies to certain chemicals, but, well, that's all ahead of us, so. I didn't bring my calendar, so I don't know what the meeting date is for our next one. It's February 18th? Yep, that's what it says here.
To
Is
the 18th.
that it?
I just want to share that we're hoping to not be piggybacking on this meeting and then the review of the technology committee meeting. He's trying to schedule it for next Wednesday instead.
Oh, you're trying to,
Instead,
okay.
I suggested going to the next month, and he'd like to, you know, like, since he was having a presenter come in, to try to reschedule that sooner rather than later.
Okay.
So maybe as early as next Wednesday. He was working on it as of this morning.
Okay, Steve, you're talking about?
Steve Schloman. So just as a heads up, because that was kind of started here, initiated here, and kind of overflowing into tech, and so it might be a different night.
What's Wednesday, the 29th? Something going on that day, but I don't know what.
28th, 7 days from today, right?
Is today Wednesday? No, today's Tuesday.
It's Tuesday, and it's next, and he
Right,
said
okay.
Wednesday was better. So yeah, so it'd be 29th.
We'll watch for that.
Just, yeah, just as a heads up that it might happen.
That, we stand adjourned.